Hi, everybody. I am asking Renee to join us, and we're going to be talking about creativity. So let's see if I can get her on. Here she is. Hello.
There's my head. Hello.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
We got a new baby here.
Oh, yeah?
Agnes Sophia. She came on Sunday, and she's a namesake after both of her grandmothers, one on Jordan's side and one on my daughter-in-law Lau's side. And she came on my dad's 80th birthday.
Wow, that's a great name, Agnes Sophia.
Yeah, I forgot what Agnes means. It's something about God and sacredness.
Uh-huh.
And Sophia means wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
right?
One of my favorite words.
Yes, they're spelling with the F.
Uh-huh. Awesome, congratulations. So you're two times a grandma.
Two times, yes, but as I told Agnes today, you're really my first infant because I didn't get to see Achilles till he was 9 months. So it's really
Uh-huh.
my first time with a new baby that's my grandbaby. So it's very fun.
It's
It's
Jordan's baby also,
Yeah,
or?
Jordan and Lau have two
Okay.
now. Yeah,
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. So the other one's two. Is that right?
almost 19 months, and my
Okay.
first two were 20 months apart. So it's a little bit of having two toddlers. It's kind of rough.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
So
lot, but
that's what's going
exciting.
on here. And I know your sister came to visit you this week, huh?
She did. Yeah. We had a lot of fun family time and she's the auntie, so she gets to play with Noah and cuddle with Noah and
Sweet.
yeah, she gets some of the privileges that no one else but mom gets.
So sweet. Well, and of course, he remembers her from, birth. And
Yeah.
she's always
Totally.
been there for you. She's so great.
Yeah, she is great.
hmm So I don't know. I think this is self-care. And I think it's sacred. And so I did a little goddess card thing. You know how you do pull the cards and all that?
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
it was my friend's word, Andrea, Andrea. The
Hmm.
word that she used was it's uncanny how precise the cards are sometimes. And
Hmm.
it just was so uncanny. So anyway, one of my cards, which I loved, was Pele.
Hmm.
And so there's not a lot of literature on her, and I didn't have the book with me, but had something to do with creativity and reclaiming your power. And
Hmm.
so for someone like myself who's service oriented and I'm really, really wired for the collective, I just am, from the stars to the kind of home I grew up in to having four kids and all of that. I'm always ready to serve and do things.
Hmm.
But, then I tend to get all grumpy and grouchy because I don't have time to write a poem or something, I don't have time to, whatever I want to be doing. So
Yeah.
instead of being that martyr that I was and that I watched my mom be, and that a lot of women are, I
Hmm.
really thought I outgrew it because, we had a few months there, very few, where we had the empty nest. And I was just like, this is so, I'm just me.
Yeah.
We both expanded in our partnership, and we just had the house to ourselves. And I thought that period was over, until everybody comes home and we have family reunions, and then I'm back into that mode. So instead
Right.
of getting grouchy about it, or, under it, or, all that, I've been working on it, as you know, trying to look at it through, the sacred self-care lens. And so I have a hard time with boundaries. So
Hmm.
because Pele came up as far as reclaiming your power and all of that and your creativity, then I thought part of self care has to be drawing boundaries.
Oh,
So we
totally.
have not talked about that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, we haven't directly talked about it, though it comes up for me all the time. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's a perfect topic, really. So much
Okay,
of what I
go.
teach in my course is about boundaries.
Yes.
Because I think especially, as you said, as women, as mothers, whatever, but not just as women, as mother and women and mothers. I see this in a lot of people who are service oriented or people who want to be, people who are conscious about their impact, right? Like anyone who has that kind of perspective can often kind of default to uh, overstepping their own boundaries, or not even having defined boundaries in the first place.
Right.
And especially I think in spiritual circles, because there's that confusion of, well, I want to let go of my ego and I want to let go of my positioning,
Yeah.
and so, I especially have fallen prey to that idea that if I'm giving in, if I'm giving up the thing I want, or, making a compromise or whatever, that I'm actually, taking the higher ground, for instance.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I've really learned that's not the case. Took a long
JJ,
time.
my friend JJ in Washington is an administrator for an elementary school. And she says, she's there sometimes 12 hours a day. And when she leaves and she
Mhm.
looks over there and she sees the second grade teacher still there at 7 at night, it's
Mhm.
it's not a contest, but it's like there's that feeling of, why is she going home and I'm not home yet? And
Right.
aside from JJ, I know from both my daughter Rosie, who's in nonprofits, and they're called charities in London, and Tessa,
Mhm.
who was in Mercy for Animals, that there is this underlying culture of martyrdom, but they don't
Mhm.
call it that, but you
Oh, of
sense
course.
it. You
Yeah.
definitely sense it. And so Rosie's been really good at drawing her boundaries and making sure she goes on vacations. And because, we're all high feeling females, and, she worked
Mhm.
for War on Want for a good long time. And she actually worked alongside people who were thrown in jail in Israel, and who worked
Yeah.
alongside women who, were, raped and mistreated, and they're trying to change laws there. And so the people would come home and she's around them. And so they
Mhm.
definitely are pouring their souls out. And here she is going on vacation, right?
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then Tessa and Kyle too, when they worked for Mercy for Animals, there was just that whole intense thing, like, what more can you do? What are you doing for the animals when you're not putting your 40, 50, 60 hours a week in? What are you doing on the weekends? Are you doing the marches? So it's not just motherdom. And
Right.
it's definitely a thing where, at least, maybe not in the glamour studio, I don't feel it with my students. And I don't know if Jim feels it at the college, or if professors feel it so much, but in certain demographics, it's a thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say it's even a thing outside of like service-oriented demographics. Obviously, just because of capitalism and, the corporate environment and everything, there's a lot of companies that have reputations for that a similar kind of martyrdom that isn't really so much in the name of the cause as it is in the name of productivity, or, getting ahead
Oh,
or
there we
whatever.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to just back up and comment on what you were saying, I think all of it, no matter what the motive is, it really all operates from this idea of scarcity.
Mm.
This idea that our time is scarce, that our energy is scarce, that um, and a certain kind of intrinsic devaluing of life in all its forms, which is ironic, especially, in movements where it's all about like helping, people, animals, whatever. Um, there's like a price tag still being put on, even if it's not monetary. It's almost like an ethical price tag, or like, how valuable is your life?
Right.
How many, how many sacrifices can you make to equal some certain kind of value for your life?
Yeah.
And ultimately, yeah, there's a lot going on in the world and a lot that needs to be done or can be done. But I think that we can also sort of lose ourselves, lose even the care that we're putting into it by kind of like chasing an outcome. Like none of us as individuals um are ever going to make a contribution in a way where, let me back up. So basically, I'm thinking of like what Jesus said, right? Like, there will be poor always, right?
Yeah.
And what I mean to say is not that people can't make a contribution, but that when we get our personality, or our sense of self wrapped up in the contribution we're trying to make, our motives get crisscrossed. And so
Isn't
we're
that well
not,
said? Well said.
I can't
No,
tell.
but you know what I love also that you touched on, that you pinged on it and then you bounced back off of it, is when we get focused on the outcome, and that is where
Mhm.
creativity comes in, and the process comes in,
Mhm.
and the joy comes in, and we've talked about that at length.
Hmm.
So, but a better way to say that is how you just said that. It's not just the outcome. It's just when you focus on the contribution itself. It's kind of reminds me of when I was a Christian for however many years. I really not prided myself, but I was really desperate to memorize the whole Bible.
Hmm.
Like I wanted to know everything. I wanted to pour myself into it. And I wanted to know this idea that the Bible talked about God, and I wanted to know God. Then
Hmm.
when I realized, who am I? I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea who I am. So
Okay.
I think it's a version of maybe that you're
Hmm.
not just being and just being alive and just being in a human body
Hmm.
and experiencing breath and the sky and just existence gets forsaken if we're too caught up in the contribution.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I had a spiritual teacher who put it this way for me, which was really helpful. Is like some people's path in life is to be the revolutionary, the activist, the person who truly is a martyr, like a martyr, a true martyr, not a martyr in the sense of the word that's like, um, as like a psychological chip on your shoulder or something is someone who gives their life for a cause. And I
Yeah.
think there's so much there's almost like this glorification of it so that people want to do that for the cred or for the, whatever. But this teacher was saying that there are people who were born to be martyrs, like that's their path in life.
Mm-hmm.
And and the real question is it you? Like if you get really honest with yourself, and you go inward and you get in touch with your purpose, is that really you,
Mm-hmm. Well,
And I think so many people mistake themselves for that, or they give themselves to that idea when it's not really their path.
or let's throw that baby out with the bathwater. Let's say that no one is born to be a martyr. Just thinking about, the 9/11, the guys on the plane, like that was the goal for them. They had to do some really
Hmm.
shitty stuff in order for them to be martyrs and to get where they wanted to go. And,
Sure.
even, you know, Joan of Arc, or I can't, there's a long, long list of martyrs from the past. And there are still martyrs in, tribal places where Catholics and Christians go. And I heard stories about a family that was burned at the stake, and the mother was cuddling their child, and the baby's bones were inside the mother's ribs when they came out. Like real martyrs for the sake of Christianity. And how about if there were no religion and no thought forms that promoted this type of martyrdom, perhaps that no one's actually called to like die for the cause. How about that? Sorry, no
Yeah,
offense to
yeah.
whoever taught you that, but that I had to just go, no, sorry.
I mean, no, it's an interesting point. It's worth because on the one hand, I would definitely say that from especially in the psychological realm, like especially that kind of role that many women adopt, like the role of the martyr. I definitely think no one was born to do that. On a grander, like karmic scale, where you take the long view and so many things happen for so many reasons, and we can't really place value judgments on things as good or bad, right or wrong, because we only see from our limited human
Mm-hmm.
perspective. I don't know, but I want to leave space for that because I don't know, you know what I'm saying? But I think for our practical purposes, it's completely acceptable to say like, no, we're not martyrs. Like our energy, our time, our sense of fulfillment in our lives, those things do matter. And then when we are holding space for that in ourselves, we're actually holding space for that in other people. Do you
I
know what
love
I
that
mean?
too. Say more about that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I would just say, for instance, as a mother, in the way I was raised, and in the way I'm sure that my mother was raised, was we just give and we give and we give. And the pattern that I noticed emerging with me, and that I've retrospectively kind of learned about in my mother, is that the giving hits a point where it flips into resentment.
Mm-hmm.
And so this buildup happens of okay, I'm going to sacrifice, you can eat my rice. You can, whatever, like whatever it is. Like you have my serving. You
Yeah.
can I'll stay up one more hour for you, or I'll wake up at 5 a.m. for you, or because you're
There's a
awake and you're
book.
talking.
There's a book that was written probably, right around 1995-ish, called Burnt Toast, and it's all about this.
Mhm. Yes, that it's yeah, burnt is probably the best way to describe it because it emotionally feels that way,
Yeah.
like a deep frustration that
Hmm.
suddenly bubbles to the surface.
Well,
So
and then
anyway,
if you have a toaster that accidentally burns the toast and the children won't eat it, mom eats it.
yeah, oh
So it's a
right,
double.
mom
It's
makes
a
burnt
double.
toast.
It's such a great title because it's you're going to be burnt. You're going to be toast. You're going
Yeah,
to be toast if you keep this up. But the thing that you don't know is you can do it for 15 years. You can.
you can. I
It
mean that
does
yeah,
change.
it's
Like
not about
you're,
whether you can or you can't.
yeah.
It's not an issue of that.
But it's not forever. That's the weird thing is it's not forever. But anyway, go on. Say more about that.
Well, I think there's really different levels you can do it on. Because there's one level that's a certain level of self-sacrifice that's I think is really beautiful because it's a self-sacrifice of what you think you want to do and then instead giving yourself to the moment. And with my son, I've experienced that as like a surprise gift. Like, oh, I
Right.
don't want to play Legos for 5 more minutes, or when it's
Yeah.
already been 30, or I don't want to like watch this baby show or whatever these things are. And then because you do it and you put yourself in the world with the child,
Hmm.
you open up to a new experience of presence and connection and intimacy with them
Yeah.
that happens really by
Yeah.
accident.
Right.
So there's
And
that
that
level.
and that's going to be a surprise to someone who is boundary oriented. But I mean, the whole
Mhm.
message of the Christ, the whole message is to suffer and lay down your life for those around you. And
Yeah.
that if everybody thought of doing something like that, we would be saved. That would be our salvation for all
Hmm.
of us to put others, on their radar and be self-sacrificing at times. Um, you don't have to like die, but just the whole idea of giving yourself to others is what will save us. And
Yeah.
did you see Toy Story 3?
Yes.
That's the one where they're all going to get crushed if they don't hold hands, but they
Uh-huh.
don't know that. So by holding hands, they're just holding hands so they can die together.
Uh-huh.
So they all grab hands. They're in the big thing and they're going to get killed. So they all decide, hold hands, goodbye, we're going to go. But because they held hands, they didn't get sucked in.
Hmm.
So by being together and joining forces, they saved themselves. So
Uh-huh.
just by joining together and seeing themselves as a whole, or accidentally becoming a whole. So it's
Hmm.
what we've talked about scientifically, and we've talked about and coming from the whole enfoldment. We talked about that like I don't know a month ago. So it's that
Yeah.
idea. So I like the idea of self-sacrifice for a surprise intimacy and that kind of a contribution on a relational level. And I think that there's a lot of books and little memes and TikTok stars kind of addressing the whole mother martyrdom thing.
Hmm.
But then there's a kind of boundary, and we talked about the workplace and charities and nonprofits. But I think that there's also another boundary, which is really tricky when you have a disagreement with a friend or a loved one or a family member, and you have to draw a boundary to not let that get between you, or it's
Hmm.
going to take you all down. So that's for me, it would be like a tenant. You have to drop your tenets for love,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
or
yeah. So go ahead.
or maybe I don't know, go ahead.
Well, there's a few points I want to make based on what you said. First is the allegory of the Christ and Christ's martyrdom and what that means on a metaphysical level. So I think the Christ life is interpreted as a heroic kind of martyrdom, like you sacrifice yourself and then, everyone is saved and that makes you the hero, right? But I really think, and I believe that really every religious allegory is a metaphor for non-duality. So when I look at a story like that, I see the metaphor of the surrender of the self into the unitive whole, not the loss of the individual,
No.
which is very different, and even the loss of the ego. I've learned also from the same spiritual teacher that the ego is actually really important, and a healthy ego is good for us and helps us get by in life and helps us survive and all that. So even as a spiritual practitioner, you still want to have a healthy ego. You just want to know when it's operating, and
Right.
ultimately have mastery over it if possible.
Right.
But going back to the Christ metaphor, I really see that as what we've talked about often, about losing the self, quote unquote, losing the self, or surrendering the self into the moment, into the present moment, into reality. So that's dissolving the boundary of self and other, right?
Love
That's,
this.
I
Yeah.
see it as the same. So
Yeah.
there's that. And then going back to the thing about moms is, so there's that positive side of the martyrdom where you have that dissolution of the self, and it opens you up to greater connectivity. And then there's that negative side of the martyrdom where you're giving of yourself to the point that you're negating yourself, which to me actually is doing a great disservice to your child,
Mm-hmm.
um, whether they're male or female, but in different ways. For instance, when I notice my son noticing me being an empowered woman, I have a very strong sense of, like, that is how I want to raise a male in this world. Like, that is what I want him to see, what I want him to, think of as the um what's the word, like the baseline, or like the example of a woman, is a woman who has boundaries, a woman who is empowered, who stands up for herself, shows up in her own life, shows up for others. And if my child was female, I would want to be exemplifying that person for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I've also learned, when I give up myself for my son, he actually is harmed by it. It doesn't benefit him, even though he gets his way in the short term. In a lot of ways, he doesn't benefit, because the more I negate myself, the more I deplete myself, and the more I can't give him the presence and
Yeah.
energy he deserves.
It's that whole put your oxygen mask on yourself first, or you can't save others.
Exactly.
It also robs the child or the partner or the friend or whatever we're talking about. It robs, if you come and rescue too many times, or you give in too
Mhm.
many times, you're robbing them of, growing some resistance. I mean,
Completely.
resilience. They
Yeah,
need to be a
resilience
resilient person, right? So they
and
need to learn.
empathy.
Yeah.
And empathy too, because if my son doesn't empathize with the fact that I'm tired and I'm not going to do this thing for him, even though sometimes I do, or empathize with the fact that I do like 100 things a day for him, and then maybe I'm just going to choose not
Yeah.
to do this one or whatever.
Yeah.
That's important too.
We had a tiny little incident, which we're going to have a million of them. This is just one, where our little 19-month-old grandson who lives with us was, being a little pill. And, it's okay right now, almost, because the new baby just came and we're just kind of testing the waters. But he got a little out of control, which we've never seen. And no one kind of knew what to do. And so when my partner and I talked about it, and I said, well, we got to have a little mercy, like, man, we don't know what to do right now. It's okay. And he said, yeah, but giving a boundary is the most merciful thing you can do,
Yeah.
because it's for the long term. So it's hard to see that when you're emotional and you're merciful, or whatever it's called, you're empathetic and all of that.
Mhm.
But someone who's trained to see the long term, which would be someone like Jim, or someone like JJ, who works at an elementary school in crisis, she's the crisis intervention specialist.
Mhm.
The long term mercy looks a lot different than the short term mercy.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the most profound lesson, truly the most profound lesson I've learned as a parent, and that's
Mm-hmm.
saying a lot, because I've learned a lot of really great lessons, is that boundaries are love. And the reason is because boundaries give us a sense of who we are, how to operate, where we are. They give us a sense of how we can be in the world. And with my son, who is on the autism spectrum, he really thrives when he has boundaries, because he doesn't like ambiguity. He wants to know, is this okay? Is this not
Yeah.
okay? Is this safe? Is this not safe? And
Right.
so do all children. There's no exception.
Right. And
And
fundamentally, your boundaries will expand and expand and expand as you age and as you mature and as you gain wisdom.
Mhm.
Um, I had something really great explained to me by one of my therapists when I was about your age. I guess I was like 39, 38, a little older
Mhm.
than you. Um, she said something like, Renee, we wouldn't have a river if there were no banks. You'd just be oozing out all over the place and you wouldn't function as a river. You'd be like a messy old swamp.
Yes.
So that
Hmm.
stuck with me absolutely forever. And the other thing that we probably talked about is in the Bible, it says, love your neighbor as yourself. It's a given.
Hmm.
It's a given that you're on your own radar and that you're loving yourself and you're being loving to yourself.
Hopefully.
It's just,
Yeah.
it's assumed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, as far as like, I love what you said. We're taking the whole boundary idea and mercy idea and martyr idea, and you're stretching it, which I love, into the whole idea of the disillusionment of self. But it has to be to connect with others, though, in order to connect. And so
Yeah.
those kind of reflexes, which you have to stretch, you have to exercise that muscle to get good at it to where it is a reflex. My
Right.
reflex right now is to go do, go do, go do, go do, go do. And then I do get a little tired and a little grouchy. So I don't want it to turn into resentment. I need to change my reflexes.
Sure.
And so another idea, though, keep going back to the mother thing, is just like Tessa is really good at, like, I don't want to have this conversation. We're not talking about that anymore.
Hmm.
There comes a point where she's really getting good at that, and I affirm her for that. That where she doesn't want to go and she feels uncomfortable, she won't. Right? You know how some people
Hmm.
kind of press you, and you get done with the conversation. You go, whoa, what did I just say? So
Hmm.
boundaries like that as well,
Yeah.
right? So that you're being true to yourself. And then the
Yeah.
greater picture that you just made me think of is, because we have a newborn, is you take that swaddle and you swaddle them in real tight because that's what they're
Hmm.
used to. Then as
Yeah.
they get older, they don't need that swaddling. And
Exactly.
that's the micro. And then the macro is we are souls. We're
Hmm.
souls. And we're not flying around the universe in, geometric shapes and colors right now, even though we could. We're very what's it called? What's the word?
Embodied.
Fundamental. Yeah, we're fundamental right now. We're still our souls and our minds, or whatever we are, whatever this
Hmm.
beingness is. We're still
Yeah.
in the fundamental stages because we have bodies,
Right.
because that's where we're comfortable and that's where we feel safe.
Hmm.
And one day, maybe we're all going to be flying around the universe,
Hmm.
like the people on DMT, and be all unified, and then be able to separate and do all that stuff without a body. But that's what that
Right.
reminded me of, is the whole newborn thing, and the warmth of the sunshine on us. Just the way we see the universe right now is, who knows when it will graduate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love the swamp metaphor, the river versus the swamp, because I spent
That's me.
so many years as a swamp being like, why am I always leaking? Why am I always losing energy? Why am I such a mess? Like, why am I such a boggy mess of emotions and whatever? And it was because I didn't know how to plug my leaks, emotional leaks,
Yeah,
energetic
yeah,
leaks. Because I was like, here, have some, have some, have some. That I'm being a good person. Like, have some,
right,
have some. And
right.
it was like out of hand. And so
Right,
what I
but it's
teach,
still, even though you realize it, it's like singing. I've said this before. You can't just know the right way to sing. You literally have to do it. So
sure,
I know, I mean, I could probably teach a class on self-care, but my reflexes have not been practicing the idea that for connectivity, you give your contribution, with joy in the moment,
mhm,
and you do self-sacrifice for those things. My reflex is to just, I'll do it all. Let me do it.
totally.
So
Yeah.
it's really hard to change those reflexes. And I've been working on it a good long time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it is challenging,
Mhm.
but it's I think it's really important to learn how to volitionally open and volitionally close, and to
Yes.
close partially, not close completely, because I think, a lot of times in my experience, it was like, oh, I'm completely out of energy, slam shut, depression, anxiety, like completely depleted. And so in my courses, I teach this. My whole course could honestly be described as a boundary setting thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's starting from like boundaries 101, not like, call your boyfriend and, tell him these are your new boundaries or something, but it's
yeah,
like with yourself,
yeah.
learning to parent yourself through health practices, through routine and rhythms. It's the natural boundaries that nature gives us.
Isn't it
Um,
funny that, and some people already know all of that. Jim
mhm,
Urbanovich, my partner, we've been together since I was 16, and I'm telling you, from day one, he worked out every single solitary day and said, if I don't work out, I'm no good for anybody. And I probably judged him harshly when we were in the throes of the 4 kids running around like crazy people, me gaining, 50 pounds, all of that. But he knew he needed his boundaries, or he
mhm.
would just not be any good to anybody, and it just came with that. He just came like that, and so did my friend JJ. Some people don't suffer from this at all, but
Right.
I love your class, and I go back to it often. I loved it.
Yeah, thank you. There's a couple questions here. I've never done this before, so let's see. How do I get to a point where I feel it's okay to take or have? That's a really good question. I think for me, when I think about the experience of when I didn't think it was okay, um,
That's
it had a
another
lot.
week. That's another whole topic. We could talk about that whole thing next week.
Yeah,
How
we
do I know
could.
when it's okay to be a taker and not a giver? Wow, great
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, do you want to do that? We could ask them to come back for next week
Well, you
and
can give a
really
little
get.
teaser. What were you going to say? I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no, that's okay. Yeah, I mean, I think for me personally, I had to change the narrative of what I believed um, taking and giving really was. I originally had a narrative that giving was saying yes to everything that everyone asks you.
Hmm.
Um, and then I started to see the consequences of that narrative playing out in my life. And so
Right.
making a
And
conscious
in playing out in the
choice.
person that you said yes to, because if you want, if you say yes, that I was accosted at church to do some kind of a musical thing,
Hmm.
over and over and again. And I remember it because it's finally how I learned how to put my foot down. But when you do say yes and then you leave them high and dry in 6 weeks, once you take the
Yeah,
job, it's not a good fit. You never should have
right.
said yes. It
Yeah,
was not a good fit. They forced you into
yeah.
it. Bad idea. So it's not
Hmm.
just for yourself, it's for
It
the other,
is for them. Yeah, yeah.
it's
It's
for the
yeah.
whole.
Instead of, leaving them high and dry, you say, you know what, this isn't the right time for me. This isn't appropriate
Hmm.
for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've had so many lessons in the workplace on that too, of understanding when something isn't good for me, and
Yeah.
I don't have to do it just because a higher up asked me to do it or whatever. There's so many nuances, obviously, to that topic too.
So, yeah. So, anyway, go on.
I think that's probably a good summation at the moment is just
Uh-huh.
changing the narrative, the martyr narrative that we might have running is like, it's okay for me to take care of myself. It's okay for me to, you know, to choose not to do these things.
Yeah.
Um, and I would say like journaling about it is really
Hmm.
important to like write it down. Like these things are okay for me, these things are not. Because first you got to get in touch with yourself and what is
Yeah.
okay. And
Yeah.
that's
And
the biggest thing.
for me, if I don't write it down, and what's horrifying is when, 5 years goes by and you pull out your journals and you go, oh my effing goodness, I have the exact same story today that I had 5 years ago. You've got to change the narrative.
Hmm.
But yeah, for the teaser, I'm just going to say I didn't understand how good it would feel to be a taker. It's intoxicating. It's
Hmm.
lovely. And just the other day, my daughter, Rosie, was just really reaching out over and again, over and again, over and again to another member of the family. And it just choked me up. And I thought, oh gosh, this makes me feel so good. Is this how, when I give, it makes people feel this good? So
Hmm.
it's just intoxicating to be given to. It's
Yeah,
such a good feeling, and it's good for the giver too. If you're careful with it, and you, like you
yeah,
said, you're doing it for the right reasons, and it's not ego driven or outcome driven in relationships, as well as the workplace, as well as charities, and larger expansive scenarios like church. I don't know, because church is the same, right? And
right.
PTA, all of those organizations. So
Totally.
where people have the same goal, they all want to contribute. They all want the same outcome. So
Right. Yeah, I love that. So next week we can talk about that, and we can also talk about how being the giver actually ends up making you the taker, and being the taker can actually end up making you the giver. That'll be really good.
Oh, I can't wait to hear about that little inversion. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. All
Okay,
right.
I'll see
Bye. Love you.
you next week. Bye. Love you.